I never thought I'd see Marcus like this, ragged, unhinged, and desperate. But there he was, pacing in front of Janet's desk at 7 in the morning, his voice ricocheting off the sleek glass walls of Taurus Technology Solutions. The chaos had started before I even stepped out of the elevator. "What do you mean, frozen?" he barked, towering over Janet as she shrank back into her chair. "That's my money." My stomach tightened. I knew what he was talking about. The $2 million that had been flagged by the bank just hours earlier. It wasn't his money. It was company money. And it wasn't going anywhere, not after everything we'd uncovered. Sarah appeared beside me, her tablet already glowing with updates. "He's been here since 7, she murmured under her breath, keeping her voice low so only I could hear. The transfer triggered a red flag when he tried to move it offshore. A small smile tugged at my lips. Everything was falling into place, exactly as we'd planned. Marcus turned sharply at the sound of our voices, his face flushed with fury. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his designer suit wrinkled from what must have been a restless night. "You!" he spat, pointing at me like I was some kind of enemy combatant. "What did you do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I strolled toward my office, letting him trail behind me like a brewing storm. When we reached the door, I gestured for Sarah to follow us inside. She shut it firmly behind her, locking Marcus in with us. I secured our company's assets against unauthorized access. I sat evenly, settling behind my desk. My tone was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Would you like to discuss the details?" "Details?" Marcus slammed his palms onto my desk, leaning in close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You froze $2 million of my money." "Our money," I corrected, my voice unwavering. "Company money. Any suspicious transactions are automatically flagged and frozen. It's been policy for the last 6 months. His eyes narrowed. "You're lying. You made this up to screw me over." "No," I said simply. "You'd know about the policy if you bothered to show up to any of the security briefings." Sarah cleared her throat and held up her tablet. "Shall we go over the numbers, Marcus?" she asked, her tone professional but laced with quiet authority. She swiveled my monitor toward him, pulling up file after file. It wasn't just the $2 million he tried to steal. It was everything: the emails, the fake consulting fees funneled into shell companies, the sabotaged contracts, the secret deals he'd struck with competitors. Each revelation chipped away at his arrogance until he was visibly shrinking in his seat. "You can't prove any of that," he snapped, though his voice wavered. Sarah arched an eyebrow. "Actually, we can. Every email, every transaction, every meeting. It's all documented, including your repeated attempts to access restricted accounts over the past 3 months." Marcus adjusted his tie, desperation creeping into his posture. "I'm a director of this company," he said, his voice rising. "I have every right to steal." I cut in, my tone sharp. "To sabotage contracts? To undermine our future? That's not leadership, Marcus. That's fraud." For a moment he looked like he might crumble. Then something shifted in his expression. A flicker of defiance mixed with panic. "Wait until Dad hears about this," he sneered. "You've overstepped, Alex. Way overstepped." "He's already on his way back from Tokyo," I said, watching his face closely. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Want to guess the agenda?" For the first time, genuine fear flickered across his features. "You wouldn't." "No, Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You did this. Every lie, every scheme, every betrayal, it was your choice. I simply ensured we had the proof." He collapsed into the chair across from me, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "The money," he muttered, almost pleading now. "I need that money, Alex. I made some promises." "Gambling debts?" I wondered silently, studying his reaction carefully. Or maybe it was the investors he'd misled about his new company, the one he planned to build using stolen clients and capital. "How did you think James Chun would react when he found out?" I asked casually, tapping another file on my screen. "Did you really believe he wouldn't tell me?" Marcus's head snapped up. "How did you know?" "Because unlike you," I said, letting the words sink in, "I pay attention to everything." Sarah slid a thick folder across the desk toward him. "Your complete activity report for the past year. The board will receive copies tomorrow. along with our recommendations for legal action. Marcus's voice cracked. Legal action? You'd send your own brother to jail. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. You tried to tear apart everything Mom and Dad built. What did you think would happen? He shot up from his seat, pacing again. Dad will understand. He always does. Not this time. I pulled up one final document on the wall display. A series of emails filled the screen, emails where Marcus had discussed falsifying medical records, planting rumors about Dad's declining mental state, even pushing for his early retirement. This isn't theft, I said, my voice cold. This is attempted takeover. You weren't just trying to steal from the company, Marcus. You were trying to steal the company itself. That's not true, he protested, but Sarah interrupted him. Save it, she snapped. We've heard enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from security. Dad's car had just pulled up. I stood smoothing my blazer. Ready to explain yourself, Marcus? His face twisted in panic. Alex, please. We can work something out. I'm your brother. I met his desperate gaze. You called me useless. Let's see if Dad agrees. The next hour was brutal. Dad sat stone-faced as Sarah and I laid out every piece of evidence. Every deception. Every betrayal. Every crime. Marcus sputtered excuses, but Dad silenced him with a single look, one that spoke volumes. Marcus, Dad said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. Go home. Don't speak to anyone. Don't access anything. Just go. Dad, Marcus began, but Dad cut him off. Go. Home. After Marcus slunk out, Dad turned to me. The office had emptied, the weight of what had transpired pressing down on the air. How long have you known? He asked quietly. About his schemes? 3 months. About his character? Years. I hesitated. I tried to tell you. He nodded slowly, exhaling deeply. At 65, he suddenly looked every bit his age. Board meeting. 9 sharp. When he left, Sarah released a long breath. That was intense. I watched Marcus's car pull away through the window. It's not over. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous. He has no access, Sarah reminded me. Systems are locked down. It's not the systems I'm worried about, I murmured. It's what he'll do next. My phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus. You've ruined everything. Hope you're happy. Sarah frowned. Should we be worried? No, I said, deleting the message. But we should be prepared. Call security, review protocols. And Sarah. She looked at me expectantly. Yeah. Thank you. She squeezed my shoulder before leaving. Alone in my office, I studied the family photos on my wall. Mom's smile. Dad's pride. Marcus's smirk. Tomorrow would change everything, but I was ready. Marcus had called me useless. Tomorrow he'd learn just how wrong he was. The boardroom felt suffocating the next morning. Its sterile white walls and polished oak table amplifying the tension in the air. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Sarah on one side and Dad on the other. Across from me, Marcus slouched in his chair. His usual arrogance replaced by a simmering resentment. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up. An uncharacteristic disarray for a man who prided himself on appearances. The other members of the board filed in quietly, their faces masks of professionalism masking thinly veiled curiosity. Rumors had spread like wildfire overnight. Whispers of embezzlement, sabotage, betrayal. No one spoke as they took their seats, but the weight of what we were about to discuss hung heavy over the room. Dad cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his face. This meeting concerns allegations against Marcus Chun, Director of Business Development. Marcus stiffened visibly, his jaw tightening. He didn't look at anyone, not even when Dad continued. Over the past several months, Alex and her team have uncovered evidence of fraudulent activity within the company. These include unauthorized transfers of funds, falsified contracts, and attempts to manipulate internal systems for personal gain. Dad paused, glancing at Marcus briefly before turning back to the board. We will present the findings now so that each of you can make an informed decision regarding appropriate actions. Sarah stood, her tablet glowing with organized precision. She tapped the screen, and documents appeared on the wall-mounted display behind us. One by one, she walked the board through the timeline of Marcus's schemes: emails detailing fake consulting fees routed to offshore accounts, invoices linked to shell companies, records of sabotage deals that would have cost Taurus millions if not for our intervention. For context, Sarah added, her tone clinical but firm, these activities began shortly after James Chun joined as Chief Financial Officer last year. It appears Marcus attempted to counterbalance perceived threats to his influence by destabilizing key partnerships and redirecting resources. James nodded gravely from his seat near the far end of the table. I flagged irregularities during my first quarter review, he confirmed, but Marcus dismissed them as clerical errors. A murmur rippled through the room, but it quickly died down as Sarah pressed forward. Additionally, there is evidence suggesting Marcus sought to undermine senior leadership, including efforts to question Alexander Chen's mental fitness for his role as CEO. Gasps erupted around the table. Even those who hadn't been privy to the full scope of Marcus's machinations looked shocked. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, I couldn't help but feel vindicated. For years, Marcus had painted me as incompetent, lazy, unworthy of my position. Now the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. When Sarah finished, she stepped aside, leaving the floor to Dad. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. Marcus, he said, his voice softer than before but no less commanding, do you have anything to say? For a moment Marcus said nothing. Then slowly he rose to his feet. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies but finding none. Finally he turned to Dad. This is ridiculous. He spat, his voice trembling with anger. Alex orchestrated this entire thing to get rid of me. You're blindly trusting her because she's your favorite. Dad's gaze hardened. Enough, Marcus. This isn't about favorites. This is about integrity. About accountability. If you want to defend yourself, provide evidence. Otherwise, sit down. Marcus hesitated, his fists clenched at his sides. But under the collective scrutiny of the board, he relented, sinking back into his chair with a defeated slump. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of motions and resolutions. The board unanimously agreed to suspend Marcus pending further investigation, revoke his access to all company systems, and initiate legal proceedings to recover misappropriated funds. By the time Dad adjourned the session, the verdict was clear. Marcus was finished at Taurus Technology Solutions. As the board members filed out, some offered words of support. Quiet nods murmured condolences. Others avoided eye contact altogether, unwilling to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality that one of their own had betrayed them. When the room finally emptied, only Dad, Sarah, and I remained. Well, Dad said, exhaling heavily as he sank into his chair. That went better than expected. Better, I echoed, raising an eyebrow. He nearly destroyed the company. Yes, but he didn't succeed. Dad gave me a weary smile. Thanks to you. I shook my head. Not just me. Sarah, James, the entire team, they all played a part. Still, Dad's smile faded, replaced by a somber expression. I never imagined. Marcus has always been ambitious, but this, he trailed off, shaking his head. How could he think he'd get away with it? He thought you'd protect him, I said bluntly. That no matter what he did, you'd find a way to fix it. Dad winced, guilt flashing across his features. Maybe he's right. Maybe I've let him believe that for too long. It's not your fault, I assured him, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it myself. Marcus made his choices. We're just dealing with the consequences. Dad sighed again, rubbing his temples. What happens now? We move forward, I said firmly. With or without him. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in my office, staring out the window at the city skyline. The adrenaline from the morning had worn off, leaving behind a hollow ache. Victory felt hollow when it came at such a cost. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Need a break? Coffee downstairs. I hesitated, then replied. Sure. Give me 5. When I arrived at the cafe on the ground floor, Sarah was already waiting, 2 cups of coffee steaming on the table between us. She gestured for me to sit, her expression unreadable. How are you holding up? She asked as I slid into the chair opposite her. I'm fine, I lied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. It's been a long day. You don't have to pretend with me, Alex, she said gently. This wasn't easy for anyone. No, I admitted, lowering my voice. It wasn't. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our drinks and watching the crowd outside. Eventually, Sarah broke the quiet. What do you think Marcus will do now? I frowned, considering the question. Honestly, I don't know. He's desperate, which makes him unpredictable. And dangerous. Sarah nodded grimly. Security's keeping an eye on him, but he's still Marcus, I finished for her. He won't go down without a fight. Do you think he'll try something drastic? She pressed. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. If history's any indication, yes. Marcus doesn't handle failure well. He'll either lash out or disappear completely. And if he lashes out? Then we'll be ready, I said firmly, though doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Whatever he does, we'll deal with it together. Sarah smiled faintly. Together. By the time I returned to my office, dusk had fallen, casting long shadows across the room. I settled behind my desk, pulling up the security feeds on my monitor. Marcus's car remained parked in the lot below, untouched since the meeting. For now at least he seemed content to lick his wounds. But I knew better than to trust appearances. Marcus wasn't done, not yet. The real battle was just beginning. And I intended to win. The rain had stopped by the time I left the office that evening, but the air still carried the weight of the storm. Manhattan glimmered under the streetlights, its energy relentless even as the city began to wind down for the night. I walked through the lobby of Taurus Technology Solutions one last time before heading home, my footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The building felt different now, quieter, steadier, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath for months. Sarah caught up with me just as I reached the doors. You okay? She asked, her voice soft but probing. I nodded, though the truth was more complicated. It's over, I said simply. For now. For now, she echoed, her tone cautious. But Marcus isn't done. Not yet. No, I agreed, pushing open the glass door and stepping into the cool night air. He'll try something else. He always does. We walked together toward the parking garage, our conversation subdued. The events of the day weighed heavily on both of us, though neither of us wanted to admit it. Sarah had been my rock throughout this ordeal. My strategist, my confidant, my friend. But even she couldn't fully shield me from the emotional toll of what we'd accomplished. He's dangerous when he's cornered, I continued, my voice low. And right now he's backed into a wall. Which is why we've got every safeguard in place, Sarah reminded me. Systems are locked down. Legal teams are ready. Even his phone calls are being monitored. I know, I said, though doubt lingered at the edges of my thoughts. But Marcus doesn't play by the rules. He never has. Sarah hesitated, then placed a hand on my arm. You did everything right, Alex. You protected the company. You protected your family. No matter what happens next, don't forget that. I forced a smile, grateful for her reassurance. Thanks, Sarah. I mean it. She squeezed my arm briefly before pulling away. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy. The next morning arrived too quickly, sunlight streaming through the blinds of my apartment as my alarm buzzed insistently. I groaned, rolling over to silence it, but the moment my feet hit the floor, the reality of the day ahead came rushing back. Today wasn't just another workday. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was no longer just Alexander Chun, Senior Vice President of Operations. Today I was Alexander Chun, CEO of Taurus Technology Solutions. By the time I arrived at the office, the news had spread. Employees greeted me with tentative smiles and murmured congratulations, their relief palpable. For months they'd watched the chaos unfold. The shouting matches, the late-night meetings, the constant tension. And now finally there was clarity. Stability. Or so they thought. Dad was waiting for me in the CEO's office, or rather my office now. He stood by the window, gazing out at the skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. When I entered, he turned, his expression unreadable. You're sure about this? He asked, his voice heavy with unspoken emotion. About taking over? Yes, I replied without hesitation. This company needs leadership. And I'm ready. He studied me for a long moment, searching my face for any trace of doubt. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. Your mother would be proud. The mention of Mom brought a lump to my throat, but I swallowed it down. She taught me how to protect what matters, I said quietly. That's what I intend to do. Dad crossed the room, stopping in front of me. For a moment I thought he might say something, offer some final piece of advice or wisdom, but instead he pulled me into a hug. It was brief, awkward even, but it meant more than words ever could. Make us proud, he said gruffly as he stepped back. I will, I promised. The first few weeks as CEO were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and press releases. Investors needed reassurance, clients demanded transparency, and employees looked to me for guidance. Every decision felt monumental, every word carefully chosen. But beneath the surface, a deeper challenge loomed: rebuilding trust. Marcus's betrayal had shaken the foundation of Taurus Technology Solutions, exposing cracks that ran deep. Board members questioned their own oversight, employees second-guessed their loyalty, and clients wondered if they'd placed their faith in the wrong company. It was up to me to mend those fractures, not just for the sake of the business, but for the legacy my parents had built. One afternoon, as I reviewed quarterly projections with Sarah, my phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen. You think you've won, but you haven't seen anything yet. I stared at the text, my stomach tightening. Marcus. He's still trying to play games, I muttered, showing the message to Sarah. She frowned, her brow furrowing. What does he think he can do? He's cut off from everything. I don't know, I admitted, leaning back in my chair. But he's not bluffing. Marcus doesn't threaten unless he thinks he has leverage. Sarah tapped her pen against the desk, thinking, could he have an ally inside the company? We vetted everyone, I said firmly. Every employee, every contractor, every vendor. If he's working with someone, they're hiding it well. Or they're not part of the company at all, Sarah suggested. What about outside players? Competitors? Investors? I shook my head. I've already reached out to key stakeholders. No one's biting. Then what's his angle? Sarah pressed. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Check your emails. My blood ran cold. Without a word, I opened my laptop and logged into my email account. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed it. A single email sitting innocuously in my inbox. The subject line read, Insurance policy. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing the change in my demeanor. I clicked the email open, my heart pounding. Attached was a file labeled Taurus_internal_reports.pdf. Don't open it, Sarah warned immediately. It could be malware. I know, I said, closing the email and shutting down my laptop. But whatever it is, Marcus thinks it's enough to scare me. Sarah's expression darkened. Do you think it's legitimate? I don't know, I admitted. But if it is, we'll handle it, Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office, staring at the encrypted copy of the file Marcus had sent. Sarah and the IT team had analyzed it remotely, confirming it was safe to open, but only under controlled conditions. Now, with the entire security team on standby, I prepared to face whatever secrets Marcus thought he held over me. As the document loaded on my screen, my breath caught in my throat. Page after page of financial records, internal communications, and operational data filled the display, all meticulously organized and annotated. It wasn't just a report. It was a blueprint of Taurus Technology Solutions' vulnerabilities. This isn't possible, I whispered, scrolling through the file. How did he get access to this? Sarah leaned over my shoulder, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. This shouldn't exist. It does, I said grimly. And Marcus knows exactly how to use it. The implications were staggering. With this information, Marcus could expose weaknesses in our systems, undermine client relationships, and destabilize the company from the outside. But as I flipped to the final page, something caught my eye. A note scrawled in bold letters at the bottom. Let's talk. Before I share this with the world. My hands clenched into fists. Marcus wasn't just threatening me, He was negotiating. And for the first time I wasn't sure I could outmaneuver him. The days that followed felt like stepping into uncharted territory. The storm had passed, but the aftermath left its mark on everyone. On Taurus Technology Solutions, on my family, and most of all on me. Marcus was gone, his schemes dismantled piece by piece, his threats rendered powerless. Yet, as I sat in the CEO's office for the first time as the official leader of the company, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, not truly. Sarah entered the room quietly, her usual calm demeanor masking the exhaustion we both felt. "You've been staring at those photos for 20 minutes, she said, leaning against the doorframe. "What's going through your mind?" I glanced at the framed pictures on my desk, the ones of Mom and Dad, and exhaled slowly. "Legacy," I admitted. Marcus thought being born into this family meant he deserved everything. But it's not about what you're given. It's about what you protect. Sarah nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "He'll try something eventually. You know that, right?" "I do," I said, turning back to the view of Manhattan outside my window. "But next time he won't have the element of surprise. And neither will anyone else who thinks they can undermine us." The first few weeks were a whirlwind of transition. Employees adjusted to the new leadership structure, clients reassured themselves of our stability, and investors reaffirmed their confidence in the company's future. But beneath the surface, subtle changes began to take shape. Systems were fortified, protocols tightened, and transparency became non-negotiable. Every decision I made was rooted in one principle: protecting what mattered. Dad stepped down officially during a small ceremony held in the boardroom. It wasn't flashy or overly sentimental. He wouldn't have wanted it any other way. But there was an undeniable weight to the moment. As he handed over the symbolic key to the company vault, his eyes met mine, filled with pride and relief. "You've earned this," he said simply, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Your mother would be proud." I accepted the key, holding it tightly in my hand. "I hope so," I replied softly. "I'll do everything I can to honor her memory." Afterward, Dad disappeared into retirement, leaving me to navigate the complexities of running Taurus alone. Well, not entirely alone. Sarah remained by my side along with James Chan, who had become an even stronger ally after Marcus's betrayal. Together we rebuilt trust one step at a time. One evening, as I prepared to leave the office, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Alexandra," came a strained voice on the other end. It was unmistakably Marcus. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I need help," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm in trouble." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "What kind of trouble?" "I owe people money," he confessed. "A lot of it. And now they're coming after me." For a moment I considered hanging up. This was exactly the kind of manipulation Marcus excelled at, playing the victim to gain sympathy. But then I remembered something Mom used to say. True strength lies in knowing when to stand firm and when to extend grace. "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "But this doesn't mean I forgive you." "I don't expect forgiveness," he muttered. "Just a chance to fix things." We arranged to meet the following day at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near Central Park. When I arrived, Marcus looked nothing like the arrogant man I'd known for years. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. For the first time I saw him not as my brother but as someone broken. "I gambled away the $2 million, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "and borrowed more than I could repay. Now they're threatening to expose everything if I don't settle the debt." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of deceit. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I have nowhere else to turn," he said, meeting my gaze for the first time. "If you don't help me, they'll destroy whatever's left of this family." Despite myself, I felt a pang of sympathy. Not for Marcus but for the mess he'd created, for the chaos that threatened to spill over onto innocent people. If word got out about his debts, it could tarnish Taurus's reputation and jeopardize everything we'd worked so hard to rebuild. "I'll pay off your debts," I said finally. "But under one condition." His eyes widened in disbelief. "Anything. You cut ties with everyone involved," I stated firmly. "No more gambling, no more shady deals, no more lies." From this point forward, you stay out of my life, and out of this company's affairs." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Deal." In the weeks that followed, I arranged for Marcus's debts to be settled discreetly, ensuring no trace of scandal reached the public. Sarah and James helped oversee the process, double-checking every detail to prevent any loopholes. Meanwhile, Marcus disappeared from the spotlight, retreating to a quiet existence far removed from the world of business. As for me, I continued leading Taurus Technology Solutions with the same quiet determination that had guided me through the crisis. The company flourished under my leadership, its foundation stronger than ever before. Clients praised our integrity, employees admired our transparency, and investors celebrated our resilience. But perhaps the greatest victory came months later, when Dad called me unexpectedly. "Alex," he said, his voice warm with pride, "your mother always believed in you. She knew you had the strength to carry this legacy forward." Tears welled in my eyes as I listened. "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know." That night, as I stood in my office overlooking the city skyline, I reflected on how far we'd come. Marcus had once called me useless, believing strength was measured by bold moves and loud declarations. But true power, I realized, worked differently. It built foundations strong enough to withstand any storm, protected what mattered even when it hurt, and it endured not because of birthright but because of choice. On my desk sat the two framed photos of Mom and Dad, alongside a third picture I'd recently added. A candid shot of Sarah, James, and me celebrating the successful renewal of the Peterson contract. Together, we had proven that real strength wasn't in what you were given, it was in what you protected. And if Marcus ever tried again, he'd find the same quiet strength waiting for him. Some lessons, after all, are worth teaching more than once.